I'm Ed Ireland, and I'm Executive Director of the Barnett Shale Energy Education Council, and I'm also a professor teaching at Texas Christian University in the Energy MBA program, and this is where we are today, standing on the campus. And this campus has benefited greatly from the oil and gas industry. Buildings here to my left and to my right both have the money to build those buildings came from individuals who did well in the oil and gas industry, specifically here in the Barnett Shale region in North Texas. So this is a fitting place, I think, to talk about the Barnett Shale, because it's had a very important impact. Quick history on the Barnett Shale. Of course, geologists have known that it's existed here in this part of Texas for actually millions of years, actually. But for years, until really only about 20 years ago, the way to extract the natural gas out of this field was unknown. People had tried, and they never could get the gas to come out of the rock. I mean, really the physics of it is that shale is a very dense rock, and the natural gas that's here is essentially locked in the molecular structure of the rock. And so when years ago drillers would drill into the Barnett Shale, nothing would come out. They knew there was natural gas in it, but it would not come out. And it actually all took to there was an oil man, George Mitchell from Houston, who is really credited for the one who came up with the technique of combining hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling to finally come up with a way to extract the natural gas out of the Barnett Shale. And the story is an interesting one. George Mitchell was drilling conventional wells in this area in the 1970s, just a little north of Fort Worth, and he had a pipeline or a contract with a pipeline company to deliver a certain amount of natural gas every month, and his wells were starting to deplete, and they weren't delivering enough natural gas for him to make good on his contract. So he told his engineers that they needed to figure out a way to get natural gas out of the Barnett Shale. And the stories are, and I've talked to many of them who worked for him at the time, the stories were that they would say, Mr. Mitchell, we can't. We don't know how to get the natural gas out of the Barnett Shale. And he said, well, keep trying. And he paid for it out of his own pocket. He borrowed money. He tried different things for a span of 20 years, and finally came up with what worked, which was, again, hydraulic fracturing, and specifically hydraulic fracturing using fresh water. Prior to that, I mean, hydraulic fracturing has been around since 1947. There's nothing new about the technique. But prior to George Mitchell's work in the Barnett Shale, the fracturing was done with heavier fluids, drilling fluids, and so on. And here they kept trying that, and it just didn't work. And they finally, out of desperation, one of the engineers suggested that they actually save some money and just try pure water. And some of the engineers apparently thought that was a ridiculous idea, that wouldn't work. But they tried it, and it worked. So that's why now we call the fracturing that we do in the Barnett Shale slick water fracturing, because it's pure fresh water with some chemical additives that actually make the water slicker to reduce friction, so they can build up a higher pressure. So the very interesting history here then, and the timing of that was that George Mitchell he drilled the first well into the Barnett Shale in 1981, and it wasn't until about 10 or 15 years later that he had finally really perfected the technique. And by that time, word was out what George Mitchell was doing, so others got involved and starting adding their own expertise and helping improve the whole technique. So it has a very interesting history. It's produced a lot of millionaires and billionaires here in North Texas. Again, a lot of that money has found its way to TCU because a lot of these pioneers in the Barnett Shale were graduates of TCU. So they've given back to their university and built buildings and funded chairs and have done a really good job of helping develop the campus. Another interesting fact is that there is actually a Barnett Shale natural gas well on this campus, and the well head itself is off the campus, but the horizontal lateral from that well runs into the campus and specifically right under the football field and terminates at the goal line. So I think for sure this is the only university in the country, the world, that can make the claim that it has a natural gas well that runs under its football stadium. So now we're going to take some questions from Texans for natural gas. The question is, why don't more automobiles run on natural gas? That's actually a great question because we have so much natural gas in this country that basically the supply has exceeded the demand. So a new demand for natural gas, like transportation fuel, would be wonderful. And it is happening. As it turns out, the city buses in Fort Worth have been running on natural gas since the early 1990s. Actually, they converted to natural gas long before the Barnett Shale really started being developed. So they were really visionary in that sense. But quite a few fleets, not only in Fort Worth and in Texas, but all over the United States and all over the world, do run on natural gas. It just turns out it's a very small percentage of the total transportation market. But natural gas has a lot to offer. It's a very clean fuel, burns much cleaner than gasoline or diesel. Engines actually last longer and run much cleaner with natural gas because it's such a clean fuel and leaves very few deposits. You can actually go to a truck or a car that runs on natural gas, run your finger around in the tailpipe, it'll be perfectly clean. There's no soot or other kinds of emissions. So natural gas has everything going for it as a transportation fuel. The main problem is service stations, filling stations. There are companies that are addressing that problem and building service stations to run, to supply natural gas. And this is mainly at truck stops right now. The over-the-road trucks that run on compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas are a really good market. And so there are a number of service stations worldwide, US-wide, that have now added natural gas service facilities. The question is, what really makes the price of gasoline go up and down? Well, it's the same as for natural gas as it is for gasoline and many other products. And as an economist, I have to boil it down to very simply say it's supply and demand. So, for example, the price of natural gas, because of the Barnett Shale and the technology that was developed here, and the huge supply of natural gas that came out of that, the price of natural gas has been driven down very low. And the same thing is true with gasoline. The whole shale drilling phenomenon, again, was first developed here in the Barnett Shale, where we only have natural gas. And originally, the developers of that technique said that it would only apply to natural gas. Well, that turned out not to be true. And so now a lot of the oil fields, all of the largest producing oil fields in the United States are producing oil as a result of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. So again, what happened there is we've now driven down the price of oil. I think everyone will remember not too many years ago when the price of oil was over $100 a barrel, and that translated to $4 a gallon or more at the pump. And that created a lot of problems for people, budget problems. And the price has come down. Let's see, now the price of gasoline is $2 or under at the moment, and the price of oil is about $54 a barrel. So, and it's a result of the increased supply that came from the techniques of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. So the price fluctuates strictly based on the laws of supply and demand. The question is, will exporting help the price of oil go up? And the answer is yes, it certainly can't hurt. Again, when you talk supply and demand, exporting is a new market. And up until really only a year ago, it was illegal in the United States to export U.S. crude oil. A lot of people may not know that, but this dates back to a law that was passed in the mid-1970s after the Arab oil embargo that made it unlawful to export crude oil from the United States. And even though we've had a lot of extra crude oil being produced in the U.S., that law was not removed from the books until December of 2015. So being able to export is really a new phenomenon in the United States, and it has helped, but it's really in its infancy. So markets are still being developed here for more and more exports. So in the long run, it's going to be a big boost for the industry. The question is, what happens to the water that is produced along with the natural gas and the oil? Is any of it recycled, and is any of it ever pumped back down into the well from which it came? The answer is that a lot of water is produced with natural gas and oil. They're mixed together below the surface, so they come up together. And the water is separated out, and the actual device that does that is called a separator. And they then, some of that water depends on the location. Some of that water is recycled. Some of the water is also pumped into what is referred to as saltwater disposal wells. And these are very deep wells, much deeper than typical oil and gas wells, that are drilled into saltwater bearing formations. And then those formations already have salt water in them, and more salt water then is pumped down into those wells. So it's a combination of the two. There is some recycling, there is some just disposal in the wells. Sometimes the water is returned to the existing well to help lift the oil and natural gas. It's pumped in under pressure, and that's just a technique to increase the productive capacity of existing wells. So 3 ways it's used. In some cases it's recycled, some cases it's pumped into saltwater disposal wells, and in some cases it is pumped back down in the existing well to help provide lift. So the question is, how has the oil and natural gas industry benefited Texas? Well, Texas is an oil and gas state. It is the oil and gas state. And as I had mentioned earlier, the natural gas activity that came out of the Barnett Shale spread very quickly all over the state of Texas. The Eagle Ford Shale down in South Texas, south of San Antonio, and then the oil industry has benefited from that. So the Eagle Ford also has oil, but out in West Texas, in the Permian Basin, has really been rejuvenated from the latest techniques of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. The Permian Basin over the years, over the decades, has been thought to be depleted or close to being depleted many times, and now it's the largest producing field in the United States and one of the largest producing fields in the world. So it's had a tremendous impact. These new technologies have had a tremendous impact on the oil and gas industry, specifically in Texas, and as a result, the Texas budget has benefited, and of course, taxpayers of all kinds have benefited, and the state is one of the fastest growing states in the United States, and a lot of that is strictly due to the rejuvenated oil and gas industry. Ever since the first oil well was drilled in Pennsylvania in 1859, there have been predictions that oil and natural gas were soon to be depleted, and that theme has been repeated over and over and over, decade after decade. And the most recent theory was called peak oil, or peak oil and natural gas. And the notion was that eventually an existing resource like oil and natural gas would get depleted and there wouldn't be any more. And the last prediction really that got a lot of attention was that oil and natural gas would peak in the early 1970s. And as it turned out, it did. And a lot of people said, oh, now we see that in fact oil and natural gas is a finite resource and it has been depleted. And then these techniques came along, as I've mentioned, hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, and now we have gone from what appeared to be a depleted resource to one that we have hundreds of years of supply of, and we keep finding more as the technology is improved. So all of the predictions about peaking oil and natural gas or finite oil and natural gas resources have proven to be wrong because technology was left out of the equation. And every time we have reached what appears to be the end of the resource, new techniques have been developed, and that's exactly where we are now. We now have hundreds of years supply, and perhaps many hundreds of years of supply of oil and natural gas, and it's a result of technology. It's a technology-driven business, really always has been, but more so now than at any other time in history. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm representing Texans for Natural Gas, and I hope you've learned a few things. I'm still a professor at heart, so appreciate your time. Thank you.